Erik, let me start with you. The photos of the runs on the bank, I've seen it. I get it. There's people outside the bank. What is the backstory on the streets of Athens this morning?
Well, the backstory, Tom, is pretty much simply this. Athenians, and Greeks for that matter, woke up this morning to the inevitable. It was almost inevitable after Tsipras called the referendum on Friday that capital controls would have to be implemented today to prevent the economy from spiraling out of control and allow the government some measure of control, at least, yeah, let's call it control over the financial system, which otherwise would have sustained a much greater run on the bank than what we see happening now. It's not really a run on the bank. It's a run on the bank in as much as the capital controls allow it to happen. Greeks are allowed to withdraw 60 euros a day, and all payments and transfers out of the country are banned at least outside specific situations for which requests have to be made to the government.
What is the response of the other political parties? I think of PASOK and, of course, Papandreou as well. How have they responded to the Tsipras referendum?
There hasn't been much of a groundswell of response, I have to say. It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon here in Athens already, but as you know, things tend to start a bit late here in Greece. It wasn't until 3 o'clock in the morning that the government announced that the capital controls were in fact being put in place, starting with the bank holiday today that lasts at least until next Monday. The big question, Tom, hanging over everybody's mind, first of all, let's say there are two questions. Do the banks even reopen next week? That is very much an open question. And secondly, you addressed this with Vonnie and Carl just moments ago. What is the probability of a Greek exit from the Eurozone? Mohamed El-Arian, whom you're going to be speaking with, puts it at 85%. He's at the top. Then you've got Michael Michaelidis, for example, from RBS. He puts it at 40%. You've got Hans Redeker from Morgan Stanley at 60. You've got Luigi Speranza from BNP Paribas at 20. So it's really a range of probabilities across the map. They kind of average out to 50, as a matter of fact, but that's neither here nor there.
Erik Schatzker, thank you so much in Athens. We now move to Berlin, where Hans Nichols has perspective from a week in Brussels. Hans, it has been a tumultuous weekend. Does Merkel have the German people behind her this morning?
We'll find out in just a little bit. In some ways, Merkel doesn't need to bring the German people along anymore because the negotiations are off, right? She would have had a hard time selling a third deal to the Bundestag, especially a third deal that included debt relief. It doesn't look like we're anywhere near that. Now, if you somehow think there's going to be a new government in Athens eventually, and then in August we come back for a third negotiations, then Merkel's task is going to be that much more difficult because there is a fair amount of public rancor here and, frankly, frustration with the Greeks. I mean, we just heard from someone briefing at the finance ministry. He said we would have had no problem with a referendum in April. They don't understand why they're doing this now at the end of June.
Well, Hans, speaking of the referendum, yesterday, late afternoon, Jean-Claude Juncker, the president of the European Union Commission, tweeted out a link to the press release directed towards the people of Greece. He tweeted it in Greek and in English. Is this to counter in some way Tsipras's push for a no vote? Because he's basically putting out a referendum and saying, vote no for this.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, European officials are trying to work the refs. I mean, the Greek public is not a U.S. jury under sequestration. You can try to influence them, and it's going to go both ways. You'll hear a variety of sweeteners potentially from Europe all week. One quick note, though, on that tweet that was put out, a close ally of Mr. Tsipras took a picture of that very document, held it up, and tweeted that out and said, the so-called non-existent ultimatum. So clearly, there's a war of words going on between Greek officials and the Syriza party and a lot of European officials that want to see Greece somehow come back into the fold. But we're going to have a lot of attempts here, especially in Germany and elsewhere in Europe, to try to convince the Greek public before they vote that they should vote yes. Guys?
Hans, question here from Carl. What is your sense of the unity among the hardliners here in the Eurozone, between the Germans and maybe the softer line taken by the French and the Dutch and some of the other ministers?
the Germans have been vindicated in their skepticism that Syriza was ever really serious about a deal. And so you heard Mr. Sapin this morning say he was surprised but pessimistic. In some ways, the French are sounding more like the Germans. Guys?
Hans Nichols, thank you so much in Berlin this morning. Quickly to John Ferro in London. John, you mentioned the Swiss intervention. We're going to see a lot more like this. Would you presume we will see central bank organized action this morning?
Well, it depends on a number of things, Tom. I mean, for one, it tells you how global it is. But number two, it's the issue of duration. The Swiss National Bank facing continued upward pressure on the Swiss franc. Thomas Jordan, the president of the SNB, telling me only 2 weeks ago that it faced significant pressure, significantly overvalued. So their reaction was a pretty obvious one. They intervened. For me and everyone else, the question is duration and how long it goes on for. You can have spreads widen, but if that goes on for 2, 3, 4 days, then we start to think about the ECB's role in all of this. The QE issue, what is it going to take for them to increase QE? 1 day sell-off won't do that. 2, 3, 4, 5 days of aggressive widening of spreads, that may just do it. And the other question for you guys sitting over there in New York is, what does Janet Yellen do? Everyone anticipating that first rate hike since 2006 to come in September. If this continues through the summer, maybe the Fed's got something extra to think about as well.
John Ferro, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it. We thank Erik, Schatzker, Hans Nichols, and John Ferro.